Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to technically co-present with Lenny. This is an honor and a privilege. I've been with the organization for almost a year. So this is my first time presenting to you all, and I am quite excited to be here. Lenny, did you want to say anything before I get started with our objectives?
No, let's do it.
Okie dokie. Our objectives. Okay, so we're going to be defining the soul of the disordered gambler. Okay, and we're going to walk away from this understanding why assessing the soul also matters. We're going to examine gambling harm through the lens of the soul, where meaning, identify, hope, and connection reside. Explore how gambling often functions as purposeful coping, filling unmet emotional and rational needs. And this presentation will also trace the inner cycle of gambling, highlighting how near wins and false promises of successful betting can cause the erosion of self-trust and healthy decision-making, and therefore resulting in the captivity of the gambler's soul. And lastly, we're going to look through a wider lens, the approach that restores the person, not just stopping the behavior, but also integrating prevention, treatment, and self rediscovery. And I also want to make note that you're going to hear or see on the screen when you see the word gambler, it's going to be capitalized because I want to humanize the word and give the gambler an identity. And in this case, of course, again, allowing us to connect to the soul. So, what is the soul of the gambler? The soul is basically the non physical part of a person. And in this case, to be specific, the gambler. The soul encompasses their identity, their personality. Who is the gambler? Where is the gambler emotionally? Is he or she able to make emotional and meaningful and thoughtful connections? And how does he or she look at life? What are their core values? What is their moral fiber? Does the gambler even have the ability to connect to their inner strength to do what is believed to be right in a difficult situation? What is
Patricia,
their level of hope? Yes.
apologies. Don't mean to
Mhm.
interrupt. Your slides are not up. You didn't share
The
your
slides,
screen yet. Yeah, I'm
really?
so sorry.
It said it was shared. Okay, one moment. Let me escape.
You're good.
Let
No
me get out
worries.
of escape. Go back. Come in. I know the slides aren't where. Okay, let me try it again. Where is, let's close this. Share. And share. Let's go back.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. So does anybody want me to go back to the objectives so you can see that screen?
Please.
Yeah, please do. All
All righty. There we are.
right, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. It was sharing over here. All righty. I can read them again. Do you want me to read them again since they're up? Okay. So we're going to examine gambling harm through the lens of the soul, where meaning, identity, and hope and connection reside. We're going to explore how gambling often functions as purposeful coping, filling unmet emotional and rational needs. Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. That wasn't me. Okay. And the presentation is also going to trace the inner cycle of gambling, highlighting how near wins and false promises of successful betting can cause the erosion and self trust and healthy decision making, and therefore resulting in the captivity of the soul of the gambler. And lastly, we're going to look at the wider lens approach that allows us to restore the person, not just stopping the behavior, but also integrating prevention, treatment, as well as self-discovery. And again, on the screen, you're going to see gambler capitalized because we're going to make them as human as we possibly can. There we are. Okay. So the soul is basically the non-physical part, and in this case, the non-physical part of the person, and in this case, specifically the gambler. So the soul encompasses their identity, their personality. Who is the gambler? Where is the gambler emotionally? Is the gambler able to make emotional and meaningful as well as thoughtful connections? And how does he or she look at their life? What are their core values? What is their moral fiber? Does the gambler have the ability to connect to their inner strength to do what is believed to be right in a difficult situation? And what is their level of hope? Do they have high hopes? Does the gambler have hope at all? The answers to these questions are attached to the gambler's soul, to the inner person of the gambler. Gambling harm is often thought to be a financial problem. We've heard this before. However, the professional understands that the problem is so much more complex than money. This is a clinical concern. Without downplaying the clinical, we could also give way to empathizing with their concerns about their meaning. How are they identifying themselves? What is their metric? We're going to learn that the core, of course, reflects the distress in their identity, their meaning, connection, as well as hope. Were they raised with a loose code of ethics? Did ethics play a role at all? Do they have a belief in hope? For many individuals who are struggling with disordered gambling, the behavior is not the root of the problem. The behavior lies so much deeper within. Problem gambling reflects a wounded soul seeking relief, significance, and escape. And the challenge is reaching beyond this behavior to restore their inner life, again, their soul. When we talk about the soul, we're not speaking of something that's tangible. And we're not speaking specifically in religious terms alone. The soul is referring to the person's inner life. It reflects the attempts to meet unmet inner needs, such as the need for control, relief, connection, and even escape. Focusing only on stopping the behavior without addressing what is actually happening internally, the cause or the root remains untouched and therefore unhealed. It is the place where meaning, the person's soul is the place where meaning, identity, and hope connect. True and lasting recovery must engage the whole person. Without attending to the inner life, the soul, recovery remains incomplete, and the cycle of harm is more likely to repeat. So delving into the whole person will allow connection to the soul. In the soul lies their moral compass. The moral compass is how the inner life, the soul, helps in the guiding of their decision making.
So this is where I put my 2 cents in, and I hope everybody can appreciate this just a little bit. I don't know how I would get the answer to this. How many of you are familiar with some of Lawrence Kohlberg's writings and early work on the development of of moral development? Raise your hand. Yes, no, maybe. Good. All right. So Kohlberg theorized that there are three basic stages of moral development. And and he talks about pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional stages of moral development. So, in early childhood, from ages 3 to 7, moral reasoning is based on reward and punishment. So you begin to develop your rights and wrongs pretty much from your parents, your immediate family, and then maybe as you start to get out into the world a little bit, you'll interact with, peers, and you begin to develop a sense of right and wrong. Um, and then as you progress through, I guess, late childhood and early adolescence, your moral reasoning becomes more based on external ethics, like right and wrongs. And we do things because of that. Or we don't do things because they're not, you know, right or wrong. Um, Now, this is the interesting part for me that, and anybody who has an answer to this, please do share. What age do you see children start gambling? Any of you who've done histories, or maybe they play cards for money with their peers?
Yeah.
They,
Yeah, it can vary because we get introduced to it at such a young age, watching our parents and playing various games, video games. There's gambling in video games and so forth. So our young people are introduced to it at the most minute age.
yeah, yeah. I would agree. I think that's one of the big things that peer groups do. And again, now if we factor into that gaming, you
Mhm.
know, we probably see that maybe even at a bit of an earlier age, but certainly 8 doesn't surprise me. Um, all right, so if you think about this now, if your moral reasoning is beginning to develop at this point, supposing, a parent gave their child some money to go out and, you know, do something or buy something for them, and instead they bought, I don't know, some items on a video game or played cards with their friends and lost the money, and they came home and they didn't have the item that their parents sent them out for. What do you think they would do? I would think they would start to make excuses and
Of
cover
course.
up. So I guess that would be for me, how the ethics and morality of this person are beginning to alter based on external factors. So again, as we go along, we can see that, in adulthood, moral reasoning is based on more personal ethics, your sense of right and wrong, your sense of what's good and bad. And if you think about, looking at the variables of gambling or gaming in all of this, then they can get very corrupted. The story that I often tell people is about a person that I was working with who came into my office and had a grin on ear to ear. And I was talking with him and I said, you look very happy and excited today. What's going on? He said, well, I was in ShopRite today and a woman dropped a $20 bill. And I bent down and I picked it up and I gave it back to her. And I said, well, that is exciting. Why is it exciting you so much? He goes, because when I was in action, there's no doubt that I would have stepped on that $20 bill, never said a word, and picked it up and used it to gamble. And I think that illustrates just exactly what happens to the moral reasoning, the rights and wrongs, the goods and bads, the values, the truths of how how gambling can affect that moral development. Are there any questions about that? All right, Patricia. I hope I didn't
Well,
make a couple of good professors of mine roll in their graves based on that explanation, but
well, I can tell you that your story connects right to, where we're going to continue because this is a direct quote from one of the individuals that, who have been diagnosed as problem gamblers that I interviewed. And the quote is, "Gambling pulled me off my moral compass." And for this person, gambling became her duty. It became what she focused on. It became what she served, what motivated her. Um, so what we have to understand is that if the soul is healthy, anchored and truth centered, the moral compass points steadily, of course, towards integrity. But if the soul is wounded and distorted or driven by fear or addiction, the compass becomes misaligned because the soul houses our values, it houses what we love, what we fear, what we believe is right and wrong, what we think gives life meaning. The moral compass expresses those very values. So if your moral compass is tainted, everything else is going to follow. The choices we make, the boundaries that we set or don't set, the lines we refuse to cross, the justifications we allow. And we're going to get into a couple more quotes later on, but I think that's a perfect example and story, Len. So I do appreciate you sharing that. Um, what exists beneath the behavior? Persistent, relentless, or dissatisfaction, right? The feeling that something can always change or a rescue might be just one win away. Um, for a moment, it offers the illusion of possibility, especially for individuals who feel stuck or overwhelmed or financially and emotionally strained. The actual act of gambling can create a temporary sense of hope because during the process of gambling, worries about bills and relationships and health or responsibility, they fade into the background. The mind begins to narrow to the game, to the bet, to the next outcome. And the behavior begins to override those other concerns. Hope becomes misplaced. Identity becomes tied to risk and outcome, and meaning becomes attached to the winning. Conscious becomes dulled through the rationalization. Gambling creates this temporary sense of relief of what is ailing the distorted gambler in their inner self, in their soul. Gambling can become a substitute for meaning. Gambling offers the gambler the promise of change, the control in an unpredictable situation or world. And God knows, the world is turning upside down right now as we speak. Gambling can provide some form of escape from eternal discord. Over time, it replaces healthy coping and purposeful living. The system of gambling becomes the source of hope. And this next slide is going to kind of explain the system. The cycle illustrates gambling gradually distorting the inner life of the gambler. See, what can begin as hope, leading the person to tie their identity to risk and outcome. All of it is connected. As losses and chasing behavior increase, their meaning becomes attached to that actual win, and life begins to revolve around the next bet. And over time, the conscious grows numb, weakening the moral and emotional boundaries, and the cycle begins again, pulling that individual deeper and deeper into the psychological and spiritual grip of gambling. So you start off with hope, and that process begins to identify who you are, and it starts to develop your meaning of life. And the next thing you know, your senses are dulled. You're unable to clearly rationalize. And sadly, it repeats over and over and over again. The gambler fallacy, the illusion of control. Selective memory, remembering wins more than the actual losses, begins, and self-trust begins to erode when that happens. Instead of trusting wisdom, past experiences, financial boundaries, and moral values, the gambler begins trusting feelings and urges and superstitions and systems. This shift is extremely critical because these distortions open the door to the reduction of the problem. Meaningful connections, meaningful life, and ultimately their level of hope become victims of, as we know, cognitive distortion. The problem gambler begins to believe, I'm due. Oh, I can figure this out. I can win it back. And we all know that that's not the case. When a problem gambler already has a pre-morbid personality marked by impulsive behavior or thrill seeking or difficulty managing stress, those pre-existing traits can gradually evolve into distorted thinking, such as believing they can control the odds or that they are due for a win, which drives them further and further into unhealthy gambling behavior. As individuals, characteristic patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving before the onset of the problematic gambling plays an absolute direct role in their cognitive distortions.
And then
Did someone have something to say? Okay, I think that was you, Lenny. When a problem, the thought of winning, and even before money is gained, triggers a release of dopamine in the brain. Dopamine is not just a pleasure chemical, but it's a motivation and anticipation chemical. It flows strongly during the possibility of a reward, but not necessarily the reward itself. For a problem gambler, imagining a win, seeing the real spin, and experiencing a near miss can activate the brain's reward system, and that is almost as powerful as the actual win. We all know that dopamine, is powerful. It affects the brain, but over time, it can even begin to reshape the inner life or the soul of the gambler. Over time, the brain begins to chase the feeling of anticipation itself, reinforcing distorted beliefs like I'm due. This time will be different and driving continued gambling behavior. Dopamine can overtake that soul. The person now begins to chase a feeling, the feeling within, the space where the soul rests, their identity, meaningful connections, the meaning of life, and the level of hope is now low. And this feeling has now attached itself to the soul of the gambler, and the soul is now reshaped, or shall we say misshaped, by the effects of dopamine. As dopamine repeatedly rewards anticipation and risk, the soul can become reoriented around the thrill of what could happen. Hope becomes misplaced. Peace becomes conditional. Excuse me. And identity becomes tied to outcomes. Dopamine hooks the brain, but repeated reinforcement is going to reshape the soul of the gambler. And over time, the gambler's soul becomes conditioned to live on anticipation rather than reality. Hope becomes chemically stimulated rather than spiritually grounded. That dopamine surges, anticipation spikes, and the gambler feels, I was close. And when losses occur, dopamine drops drastically. The inner life begins to crave that dopamine surge more than peace, more than stability, or more than truth. The brain wants relief. So what happens? The gambler plays again. And why? Because gambling offers the fastest way to spike that dopamine back up. And then over time, the addiction and the erosion are really affecting the soul. The more the gambler loses, the more the dopamine deprivation intensifies. This creates that urgency, and desperation begins to grow. Logical thinking weakens, and the soul becomes agitated. Peace is replaced by the compulsion. Patience is replaced by that urgency. Faith is replaced by frantic effort, and the gambler is no longer playing for profit. They are playing to escape the chemical discomfort in their own brain. Chasing those losses is not just about money. It is the brain's actual attempt to restore that high, to escape the emotional crash, repair wounded pride, and regain some sense of control. So here we're going to go into some of the quotes that I got from the research for this presentation. Gambling is the only addiction where you actually can win. Dopamine does not reward winning alone. It rewards the anticipation of winning, which is why the gambler's distorted thinking feels so convincing. Dopamine-driven anticipation fuels cognitive distortions. Dopamine convinces the gambler that hope is but one spin away, one roll of the die, while the soul quietly suffers under the weight of that illusion. And these are some of the quotes. My hope was in false hope of a win. When I'm playing, everything else disappears and nothing else makes me feel this alive. I stopped praying for hope and started hoping for a jackpot. Somewhere along the way, the machine became the place I went to for answers. I kept telling myself I just needed one big hit to fix everything. I thought I could undo months of losses in one night. Part of the 10 million I spent on gambling, and part on booze, and part on women. The rest I spent foolishly. Cognitive distortion. Dopamine becomes the emotional regulator or the soul regulator. Two more quotes. The first one, I didn't give a rat's blankety blank about the action. I just wanted to get away from everyday mundane life. This statement reveals something very important about the psychology of gambling addiction. The gambler is no longer motivated by the game itself or even by the money. Instead, gambling became, to this person, a way to escape the emotional weight of everyday life. The stimulation and anticipation created by gambling triggered dopamine in the brain, temporarily replacing feelings of stress, emptiness, or dissatisfaction with excitement and relief. And the second quote, my soul helped me to connect to God, which helped me connect to my purpose, the person I was created to be. This particular statement reflects the restoration that occurs when the soul begins to heal. Gambling addiction often disconnects a person from their sense of identity and purpose, but reconnecting them with the soul allows the individual to rediscover this gambler has a relationship with someone or something higher than themselves. Through that connection, they begin to remember who they truly are and the purpose for which they were created, moving from escape and distortion back to wholeness and meaning. When dopamine governs the emotions, the walls protecting the soul begin to break down. When dopamine becomes the emotional regulator, the gambler stops listening to the wisdom of the soul and starts obeying the excitement of the moment. The brain starts chasing chemical reward rather than what is healthy or what is factual and true. As this pattern continues, the natural boundaries that protect the soul, judgment, restraint, moral awareness begin to weaken, leaving the person more vulnerable to addiction and destructive behavior. And the distortion takes over, clouding the judgment. The greatest loss in gambling is not the money that is lost at the table, but the slow surrender of the soul to a chemical promise that can never truly satisfy. Many problem gamblers are not initially chasing money. They are trying to escape feelings of restlessness or dissatisfaction with everyday life. What begins as a search for excitement and or escape slowly becomes a captivity of that gambler's soul. Gambling stimulates dopamine in the brain, creating excitement and anticipation that temporarily replaces those feelings. Over time, the brain learns that gambling can change how the person feels, making it an emotional escape rather than just something fun. The greatest loss in gambling is not that money, but it's that soul, the loss of the soul of the gambler. It's as if their body has been in chains. Their soul is now arrested. Oh, I can't connect. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Oh, I think I went too far. Yeah, all right, I'm sorry. So here at the council, and you're all familiar, we stand firmly on the pillars of support, hope, and trust. I personally, on the behalf of the council, I want to extend our sincere gratitude to all of the providers out there who work tirelessly on behalf of those struggling with gambling addiction. Your care and your support you offer to the individuals in need is so needed, so supported by what we do here at the council. And I personally am very grateful for all that you do. Every gambler who enters treatment brings more than just the disorder to the table. They're literally bringing their soul, which is in need of help, which is in need of an identity, which is in need of regaining their meaning. So I think we're about 5 minutes early, but do we have any questions?
No. before we do, I'd be interested in other people's opinions about how you do treat the soul of the compulsive gambler, of the disordered gambler, because I think a lot of it involves, the reconstruction of all the moral and ethical and honesty that has been eroded during that course.
Mhm.
Anybody want to share some of their thoughts about that?
Lenny, I'll share.
Go, please.
Um, I like to deal with a lot of self-care, and one of the self-cares that I use is the spiritual one, and that's not just religion. I mean, it's just, spending time in nature, praying if you pray, meditate, and recognize the things that give you meaning to your life. I think, like the morals and the values, they forget them and they drop them and they lose them along with all the other self-care measures that we talk about. But I think the spiritual one, I feel really glad to be able to touch that part with our addictive gambler people, because I don't think it's really touched on hardly at
Mhm.
all. And I mean, just appreciating art and music and literature. I mean, they're all spiritual self-care things that they haven't even thought about for a while. So that's how I handle it, and it seems to be working.
And that's good. And I think, I mean, I would probably sum it up under a category that I probably would refer to as like the art of living. I think the art of living and the morality and, you know, I guess, the higher order things in life just are so, eroded that, we maybe sometimes take for granted that, these things are necessary as a part of recovery.
And I think that self-care, directing them, in that pathway of self-care, absolutely puts them in a position to look at the internal and start to make or regain those most needed connections.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, Fran, I see your hand up. Are you unmuted?
No, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah,
Not
now you
unmuted.
are.
Mhm.
Yeah, I try to help them to understand that there is a reason that the program number one, the GA program, is a self-help group. And if I can get encourage the person to go into GA, that's giving them a connection with, because gambling takes away the connection to everything except the gambling. So if they get in there, and I'm thinking of one particular person who tried to kill himself, and he almost succeeded, almost blew out his brains. And he was so embarrassed because he had had a lot of medical help trying to put him back together. When he finally admitted it, and it was using meditation with him and having him to imagine what it would be like to go into the room and actually say it, when he finally said it, there were so many others that put their hands up that had tried it and had never revealed it. So that gave him a connection. And within that program, there is step three, which encourages them to turn their life and their will over to a higher power of their belief. And that's a very hard step. But I know personally and clinically that once you allow something else to guide you, in the beginning it's GA, and then you move into the spiritual realm. And your presentation was absolutely wonderful. And then they start to look at the morality pieces of themselves, because it's a 12-step program for a reason, put together by two drunks, and those two drunks didn't put it together. There was influence from a power greater than themselves. Otherwise, they could have never come up with it because it's so therapeutically sound. So then it starts to change. At least that's what I've been seeing for them. And later on, it's a movement into Gee, I haven't gone to temple. Gee, I haven't gone back to church. And that stuff starts to come up. And the power of the dopamine within the brain is so great. But now it starts to be overridden by things that they're actually doing, not thinking about. I've had people go out and start to touch, when you're walking, touch some leaves. Just feel the leaf in your hand to wake them up. And it really is, to me, a gift to be able to sit with these gamblers who are just really distraught inside, not wanting to gamble, but at the same time gambling. And that goes into depression and on and on. But it is a process of rebuilding, it's a process of relearning, perhaps that they've never gotten before, perhaps that they wanted, lots of confusion. It's just great. And again, your presentation was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
think the other piece of this is, again, when a disordered gambler is near their bottom, there is
Yeah.
no morality or honesty or,
Mhm.
spirituality. And as they start to recover, often I've had a conversation about, well, if you still have this set of values, you know what? You may have forgotten, but the rest of the world doesn't function on them. There's a
Right.
greater part and a majority of our world that does function with, ethic and ethics and morality. And, you know, people are honest with each other. They don't have to get over. They don't have to cheat or steal or lie or
Yeah.
rationalize to, be able to be a part of the world again. So that's
Mm.
important. It's an important dynamic to look at in terms of counseling and
Yep.
recovery. Any other thoughts anybody has? Questions, comments?
Yeah, I wanted
Be
to,
a very,
I,
difficult topic to deal with. So,
hello?
I think
yeah,
Holly's trying to say something. Yes.
go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say that Francis really summarized and wrapped that up really, really well. I agree. Gambling, first of all, I'm someone who's impacted by gambling or a person who has a gambling disorder. So my experience is a little different, although I am a professional. But to Frances' point, when she said about connecting to community, a lot of times I've noticed when having that person in my life who has a gambling disorder, they isolate a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if they are connected with others, it could be the bingo group or that connection of people that they socialize with. They are also gamblers. Um, Coming from a cultural lens, I also have seen it where they do pray to God about, if I get this scratch off or playing these numbers, right? Or this was a sign from God. This is why I'm playing
Yeah.
this, number today. Although I said yesterday I wouldn't, play anymore because I know I maybe, didn't pay the gas bill, last week. So I think there's a level of like morality that becomes, question, and then there's a level of spirituality that like you said erodes at the soul because now they're starting to question their relationship with God because sometimes those winnings in their mind is connected, with God, with what they shouldn't play, what they shouldn't wear, kind of connecting back or circling to those superstitions. But I
Yeah.
do think a lot of times they are isolated, and it goes back to if I could be connected and then maybe kind of separate the forest from the trees, they can start to go a little bit deeper. And so I think those gambling groups or faith-based organizations that help someone with the gambling disorder can kind of bring them back to a compass, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Thanks for allowing me to share.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It helps connect them in healthy connections. And therefore, slowly, one day at a time, one moment at a time, restoring the soul that has been damaged, one connection at a time. Um, but definitely, and I'm sure, and I didn't put this in the presentation because it was going to take me down a whole nother path. It would have been a whole nother presentation, but I think that disconnection from the healthy soul, of course, is that key thing that begins the thought of suicide and why it's so high in the soul, in the gambler, because that disconnection is so prominent, and the hope is tied to that higher power, and now they're disconnected from that higher power, or whatever that moral compass is. And of course, that's yeah, but that would have taken me. That's another presentation for another day.
We'll call on you for that, Patricia.
I
Uh,
knew you were going to
but
say that.
but to your point, Holly, it's so true that, and probably in most addictive disorders, we do see that people begin to pray to God for things, like just get me through this hangover and I'll never do this again. Just give me the one big win and I'll never gamble again. I won't have to. And how hollow those promises that come, I would imagine, from what remains of one's soul at that point and their bottom, just never actualize.
Maybe I could share a bit.
Please.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Wonderful presentation. And Lenny, I don't know if you remember me. I used to work in New Jersey. I'm actually in Ukraine now. I've been here since 2013. And I work with, I have a program, recovery program for priests, monks, seminarians. And several of them are compulsive gamblers. And I've worked with some others, and the only success that we've seen here was those who have actually embraced the 12-step program. I believe that's a spiritual solution. And if you all remember, way back, there used to be a very famous priest, Father Joseph Martin, chalk talk, and he referred to alcoholism as a soul sickness, and I would certainly agree. And I've seen with the fellows who get engaged in helping others, clean house, do their own work, and have a spiritual connection. They're able to recover and be successful. Like religion didn't work for them, but spirituality does, and then it brings them back, and then they can practice their religious calling, very differently, and kind of not be preachers telling people what to do, but kind of join with, and kind of the way that we do that in 12-step fellowship. Thank you.
That's a wonderful program, and congratulations for getting that going.
Higher power.
When let me just say this: when Lenny had approached me with doing this presentation, I specifically didn't want to rest on religion, because the soul, everybody has a soul, whether you have faith, whether you believe in God or whatever. We all have a soul. We're all created with a soul, and the challenge is just to get the gambler reconnected, even if there is no religious background, even if there is no faith base. The challenge is to get them reconnected with who they are to their core, what their life means, their value, their worth. And if that so happens to be tied to a faith or tied to some form of religion, that's a plus or whatever. But everybody has a soul, and getting the distorted gambler reconnected to that soul is key.
Yeah, yeah. I also use a lot of helping them understand they're not just a gambler.
Mhm.
That's a piece of them. And then I'll usually ask them, you have lots of other pieces. You're a husband, you're a brother, you're a father. And we go down the whole, they don't have that in the beginning. I usually ask them, what other pieces are you? And they'll do it. They always put gambler first, and then they'll put a few other things. But then we delve more into the other parts of them that they are, and that this part has really taken over. And where else would they like to go with these parts? Which ones do you want to grow into or remember? And so that helps them too. And I want to say one thing about the 12-step program, which has been on my mind a lot. Not everybody going into the GA program is there for the, I shouldn't say for the right reason, but they're there because they're a gambler. But and not all of them are using the 12 steps. In fact, I've been aware of many groups that don't even mention it. And I kind of encourage them to look at the wording. It's a 12-step program. And what does that mean? Yes, you're going to talk about the gambling, but if that's all you ever talk about, then there is not going to be recovery. You're just re-traumatizing yourself over and over again. So I would encourage people to find out what goes on in whatever group that they direct this person to, because, I've heard some stuff recently that has been really bothering me. And so if it's bothering me, it's bothering them on a different level, maybe, but it's confusing. So, when you hear one thing and then you hear something else, they don't need any more confusion when they're trying to come out of something that's killing them.
Thanks.